Welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World. It's time for a new way of practicing law, a way that honors our interconnectedness, that values what is really important, our core values: generosity, integrity, authenticity. If you agree, you are not alone. There is a global integrative law movement that is transformational, impactful, fun. It's time to grow because the world needs us. So we are interviewing lawyers from around the world who share their experiences as an integrative lawyer. One by one and together, we can and we are making a positive impact. Hi, I'm your host, Carrie Raleigh, and our guest this episode is Magistrate Gabriela McKellar, or simply Gabby. She is a magistrate in South Africa in the Children's and Maintenance Court. In this episode, she discusses her journey in the legal profession, from one where she hated what she does to where she is now, loving what she does. From hating to loving, she discovered restorative justice and integrative law. She shares with us how she uses these in her courtroom and in a very special project to her, the For the Children's Sake Mediation Project. And along the way in our conversation, there are some general life lessons, some tidbits, and some serendipitous moments that she shares with us. And through it all, I find it to be a very interesting conversation, and I hope you do too. For more conversations with integrative lawyers from around the world, go to www.integrativelaw.com. Good morning, Gabby. It's so nice for you to join us today as part of Integrative Lawyers of the World. So for starting out, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and where you are?
Hi, Carrie. I feel very honored to be part of this project, and a little bit about myself. My name is Gabby McKellar. I will be 60 years old next year. I have 4 adult children. I've been married for 35 years this year, and I live in Cape Town, specifically in one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in Cape Town, a little fishing valley village called Hart Bay. And I have 2 schnauzers and a cat. And I work as a magistrate presiding over family court in a district court in Cape Town called Wynberg. And I have been doing this since 2014, after prosecuting from 2010 for 4 years. And that was a great return to my career after a 20-year absence. So I was in my late 40s, and I'd spent 20 years raising my children, supporting my family in his ministry. He's a pastor, and with the school that the church runs. And then I felt a very strong conviction to return to the career of my youth. And so at the age of about 46, I started again at the bottom of the ladder with young graduate students half my age. And so here I am today, practicing law in a way that I find very fulfilling and very satisfying.
That is so amazing, I think, to start back your career again. Very courageous, too. You said it was a 20-year break?
Correct. It was a 20-year break, and law is very unforgiving. Law does not allow for a 20-year break, but if you're willing to start at the bottom of the ladder and put your pride in your pockets, you can do it. If you keep knocking at the door until the door opens, which is what I had to do.
So when you say
eventually the door opened.
When you say starting back at the bottom rung of the ladder, where was it that you were going to? Were you looking for jobs at law firms? Were you looking at jobs for within the court system?
Yes, so I definitely knew I did not want to work for a law firm. I wanted to be in the public service. So I applied for a position as a prosecutor with the National Prosecuting Authority. And I did eventually get a position as an entry-level prosecutor. And I worked actually in the child justice and the maintenance court. Maintenance is the South African term for child support. Okay. And that's where I started back. And it's quite interesting because when I did my articles in the 80s and I prosecuted in the 80s, the South African government was still under apartheid. And there were many things about the system that did not sit comfortably with me. And I left the legal profession thinking I'd made a big mistake to study law and thinking I'd never go back. And then when I started to feel this tug to go back to law, I started Googling and looking up what was going on in the legal landscape in South Africa. And I discovered that the entire legal landscape had shifted. And there were many opportunities for someone with my convictions to do a more restorative, healing kind of law. And that really encouraged me to persevere in my efforts to get back into the legal profession. So that's part of my story.
There is, I'm drawn to asking you like 3 questions all at the same time because I find it so fascinating. One is that your inkling from within yourself, where you thought you weren't going to go back, but you had an inkling to go back. And then when you found back, you found that there was a way for you to practice in a more restorative way that was aligned with you. And just how your inner self, it sounds like your inner self kind of knew this. But before we go there, if it's okay, if we can go there.
Of course, I'd love to tell the story.
I would like to go back to like, what was it like, you know, because we read about apartheid in South Africa but to actually speak with someone who lived, you know, you said in the 1980s, it was still there. The court system was still under apartheid. What was that like? What would the day-to-day legal system or court system be like under apartheid?
Well, first of all, there were only white magistrates, white judges, white attorneys, white prosecutors. The only people of color that were employed by the Department of Justice were the people employed to be interpreters in a court system. So that was the first very obvious and striking difference than it is today. And then secondly, for example, in the child justice era, it used to be called juvenile justice. It was quite harsh, and there was no sense of redeeming a situation or trying to give children a second chance. So, for example, when the Child Justice Act was enacted in 2010, the option of diversion and children who fall in conflict with the law being given a second chance and not being sent to prison with adults and not getting a legal criminal record was then created by the Child Justice Act. And you know, there's so many differences. It's difficult to explain, but I remember vividly one weekend I was called out to do an emergency bail hearing because there had been protesters in the city protesting apartheid, and the police had come in with cannons, water cannons, but they had put purple dye in the water cannon. So the people who came up from the cells into the dock were covered in, they were all purple, they were covered in purple dye. And the thing about South Africans is they always seem to find humor in everything, even in the worst circumstances. And they were chanting in the cells, "Power to the purple people." It was actually quite amusing. And so that kind of thing has changed completely now. The judiciary has been transformed, and yes, and you know, some of the laws that have been enacted, like the Child Justice Act, and specifically the Children's Act, which is the one that I function under, is a very progressive piece of legislation which allows for family group conferencing, lay foruming, mediation, referral for counseling, all kinds of restorative and therapeutic options. So it's a very different landscape now, and there's a lot of freedom to function as a magistrate, specifically in the children's court, in a redemptive way.
When was that act enacted?
2010 it came into power. Well, I'm struggling with the legal terminology. It's Act 38 of 2005, but it only started being used in 2010, as did the Child Justice Act, which coincides with the year that I re-entered the profession, which I find fascinating.
Yeah. Again, things were in alignment with your inkling to go back and wanting to have a system that was more restorative.
Correct.
And so when you were in the legal system, when you were younger, was it as a prosecutor in the family law system?
When I first started out, I got my articles. Articles in South Africa is like a 2-year internship. So after you've done your legal degree, you have to serve a 2-year, what they now call it a candidate attorney. When I was doing it, it was called an articled clerk. And you have a principal who is your mentor, and you serve these 2 years of training within a legal firm, and then you write quite a huge board exam before you're admitted as an attorney. Okay. And I was working at a family law firm, and I really hated it. I hated the animosity, I hated the acrimony, I hated how people were being humiliated in court, and all the dirty laundry was, dug up, and it was very adversarial. And I mean, then I was in my early 20s, and even then it felt very wrong. Yeah. And I remember talking to my husband and saying there must be a better way to practice family law, because this is just so destructive. And then we were forced to move to Cape Town. Well, my husband got a transfer, and I started looking for an alternative job. And the only job I could get was as a prosecutor. So it wasn't my first choice. So I was prosecuting in an ordinary criminal district court. But that, as I said, I did it for 3 years. I didn't enjoy it at all, not one moment of it. So when I did eventually resign, I thought I'd made a mistake to study law, because I'd been practicing for 5 years, and I was deeply unhappy for 5 years.
What was the unhappiness? Can you explain a little bit more about what you were unhappy? Because I think there are a lot of lawyers, myself included, that went through a time period where I had the same exact feeling that you did, that this is not a good fit for me. What did I do? When you said that you were working on it, working in the practice as a prosecutor for 5 years and felt unhappy, I just really connect with that. And I think some other people will too. I guess, how does that affect? So when we look at integrative law, we're thinking, how do we as lawyers integrate being a lawyer as well as being a person, being who we want and align with our values? When you're unhappy at work, how did that affect you as a whole person, or affect the rest of your life?
Well, it's very long ago now, so I can't remember too much, but yeah. Excuse me. I think that, so I was in my mid to late 20s at the time, and there was a lot of pride and a lot of wanting to make this work and be successful, and it was almost like the fact that we were trying to have a family, and I was in a church community that encouraged mothers to be stay-at-home moms, and that was almost like the excuse for me to use to get out, and I did, and I'm very glad I did. Yeah. But I remember thinking when I resigned, what on earth are all my colleagues, law student friends going to think of me? Here I am, opting for being a stay-at-home mom. I'm kind of letting down the feminist side. But when I was unhappy at work, I tended to just sort of put my head down and do the work and just think, well, this is what law is. It's just and the reason I wasn't happy, because I never felt fully competent to do the job properly. The environment that I was working in wasn't very supportive. I didn't really believe, much like you, that the outcomes we were achieving were actually helpful in any way. And And so, when I eventually escaped, if I can put it like that, it was a huge relief to me to not feel tense every morning, wake up with a knot in my stomach and rush off to work feeling tense and anxious about what the day would hold for me. And that's basically, I think, how I lived for 5 years. But I think when you're in your early 20s, you're not very wise and you're very driven, and you just think that's what life is about.
You're paying
Now I understand. Yeah, now I understand exactly. You pay your dues. You do that. So being at home with my children was one of the nicest seasons of my life. I really enjoyed it.
You said you have 4 children?
Yes.
So you were quite busy having 4 children.
I was very busy, and also my husband being a pastor and us having a school. So my life was very, very full, and I got very involved in community work as well. And I loved that. So my life was very full. And the turning point for me was when I got cancer in 2008. And I spent the better part of 2008 in treatment. And it was while I was in treatment and very, very weak from the chemotherapy that it was almost like I was down and out. And then I had the time and the space to listen more carefully. And that's when I heard this calling to go back into the legal profession. And I thought, gee, I must be crazy. Maybe it's the chemotherapy that's affecting my brain. But I thought, okay, well, let me give it a try. And I just started putting feelers out and speaking to people in the profession. And everyone I spoke to was very encouraging. And just said, yeah, why not give it a try, And then I just sort of thought, what kind of law would I like to practice? And I realized I could never go back to a legal firm, because when I was working for the legal firm, it was very clear to me that the goal was profit.
Yeah.
And my principal was the happiest with me when I came back from a course on how to draft a bill of costs, and I could milk every penny out of one case and draft a bill of costs, and that just isn't how I'm wired. I'm not really interested in making money. So that kind of was not an option for me. I just thought I can't go back into an environment where you put under immense pressure to churn out, at the end of every month, your performance is rated by how many fees you've brought in. And that wouldn't give me any satisfaction at all. So I knew that the public service was the arena where I could practice what I would call with a clear conscience, because I get a salary every month. It's a fixed amount of money, and I interact with people every single day, generally people who can't afford legal representation, and I can give them as much time as I want to without worrying whether they can afford to sit with me for 15 minutes or half an hour. I can give them as much time as their particular situation needs until we feel we have come to some resolution that's satisfying to them.
That is wonderful. It's a big shift in practice. Ours, how you're saying about the fees, and the U.S. will refer to it as the billable hour. The lawyers and the firms are required to have so many billable hours, and just how you're saying the firms are motivated by money. I just remember once I had every performance review went like this for me. Carrie, you do great work. The clients love you. The clients stay with you. We see you generating as much work, if not more, than the other attorneys in the firm. But why are your billable hours so low? It doesn't, and they'd get frustrated. And so one time the firm, my boss was very upset by this. He said, look, we hired you and we were going to give you a salary for set number of billable hours. And I think I was like 100 hours short. Maybe I was even 200 hours short. And I said, and I looked at him and I said, you know what, you're right. We did have that. It would be fair. And I would understand if you would want to decrease my pay on, I made 80%. So if you want to decrease my pay by 20%, I guess that would be fair. I could understand if you want to do that. He got furious at me. He banged his fist on the table, said, no, I want you to want more money. That is not acceptable. You should, and furious, where his face is all red. And I'm like, okay, you can pay me as much money. That's fine.
He didn't get that mindset.
No, he didn't. And it just, and I think that was one of the things where like, it was towards the end of my days in the firm practice. And it really said, it just really helped highlight, I'm a fish out of water in this environment. But going back to you, I'm like with when you hear cancer, and when I hear someone say cancer, it's a very scary word for me. And I think most people, right? If you hear cancer, it's very scary. And I guess I can only imagine that part of it that you were going through as you were healing and going through your chemotherapy. But you explained it as it also gave you time and space. And in that time and space, you could hear your calling. That was, I guess, a silver lining to probably may have been a very difficult time. And I guess,
yes, I think sometimes, especially as a mother of young children and a wife, who's committed to supporting your husband's work as opposed to your own work, you don't get time and space for yourself at all. And that's also appropriate for a season. It's not, I think we have to discern the seasons that we are in our life. And there are some seasons where we have to lay down ourselves and serve, but then we can't do that indefinitely. There comes a time when we have to withdraw and recharge and reassess and look at where we're at, and is this how we're going to function into the next season. So I'm so thankful that I made the transition when I did, because now my children each have very busy lives of their own. And if I didn't have this very fulfilling career, and I'd only given myself to being a mother, I would be feeling rather bereft and lost. But I'm not feeling an empty nest syndrome. I'm enjoying this season tremendously, and my children are enjoying that I'm doing it well, and they're so proud of me. And my son is actually now practicing law, and he will often give me a call and ask for my advice about areas of family law that he doesn't know about. So it was a timeous transition in the life of our whole family. So yeah.
I liked how you explain it as being in this, there are seasons, and embracing and living and accepting the season that you're in, knowing that it doesn't have to, this is how it is in this season, but having the clarity to know, or the space to know it's okay to change things up in my next season. I found that very freeing when you said it, and I think that's why I repeated it back, because so often in times in my life, and I think others may have done this too, you're in like one season or like one moment in your life, but part of the stress that I created was thinking that I should be somewhere else while I'm in this moment. And if thinking I'm somewhere else added like a whole nother layer of stress that then made this one harder than what it needed to be.
Exactly, because one tends to compare yourself to other people who are in a different season. I work with women who are younger than I and who have young children at home. And I can see that their life is very much more difficult than mine, because when I come home, I can relax. When they go home, they have to cook, they have to look after little ones, they have to supervise homework. And I try and encourage them and just say, it's really tough, and I really take my hat off to you, but it will eventually pass, and you will enter a different season. So I think it's important that for peace of mind and for contentment, to understand the season that you're in. And then an older, wiser woman once said to me, when she saw that I was getting too busy, she said, Gabby, you must try and do the thing that only you can do and delegate everything else. And that was extremely helpful at that time of my life, to know that there were certain things, so responsibilities and tasks that only I could do, but there were other responsibilities and tasks that I could delegate to other people, family members, friends, church members, staff, whatever. And so I think part of my journey is that I have been intentional in my life to look for women who are a little bit ahead of me, and just without making it formal or obvious, allowing them to mentor me, and gaining wisdom from watching how they are living their lives, and learning from that.
And how that one, we learn a lot from watching others and by doing and observing, but for that one person to say that to you, sometimes it can just be a casual comment in a conversation that can have such a huge, profound effect, like life-changing effect. And it's just when those comments come, or when you receive them and when you hear them and embody them, it's such a, I don't know, life-changing. And it's those things themselves are, I don't know the word I'm thinking of. Serendipitous, I think. A lot of, when I look at the timing when they come, there was a lot of serendipity. Like right when I thought I really needed help, I didn't even have time to ask for help, there would be someone that would step in, sometimes just with a casual comment. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yes.
That's how you do it. I guess it takes intentionality to have clarity on what it is only I can do and what it is that I can delegate to others. And to get that intention and clarity, we have to sometimes give ourselves the space and time.
Yes, and I think also to have, if you are, you can't be too egotistical about things, because then you think you're the only one who can do the job properly. And I think there has to be that willingness to let go of some perfectionist standards when you delegate, and allow people to find their own way of doing something. And also understand that you want to empower people around you to function beyond their current situation, so that they can also grow in their careers. So to understand that you are mentoring yourself as you're being mentored by others, you yourself are mentoring others, and it's like a never-ending chain. That we want to empower people around us to do the job well. And so I often encourage, if I see, for example, I've got a very young clerk who's working for me at the moment. She's incredibly intelligent and has incredible social skills, actually better than mine. She's much better and more patient with people than I am. And I'm trying to encourage her to consider studying law, because I can see she's got a very quick grasp of legal principles. She's got wonderful social skills. She's only 22. So I'm saying to her, I don't think you should be a clerk for the rest of your life. I really think you could be a very good lawyer.
What is the process in South Africa? Do you get a bachelor's degree and then go to law school and then do the clerkship, or is the study of law part of a bachelor's degree?
I'm not sure. It's a bit confusing to me right now.
Okay.
My son did an undergraduate bachelor's degree in social science, and then he did a postgraduate LLB. But I think there is an option that you can combine the two and then do a much longer degree. But when I did it, it was definitely a postgraduate degree.
Okay.
So whichever it is, it's about a minimum of 5 years of studying. Okay. Or maybe 4 years if you do a pure law degree. I'm not sure. But then you have to do the 2 years of internship or clerkship, and then you have to write a subsequent exam, which they call the board exam. There's actually 2 of them. Very, very tough exam. Before you are able to be admitted as an attorney. So we have attorneys and advocates. Attorneys are, I don't know what you would call them in America, but advocates, we're more like the British system, where you've got barristers and, what do they call them?
Solicitors.
Barristers and Yes,
solicitors? Yeah.
Something, I'm not sure. And then the advocates appear in the higher court and are instructed by the attorneys.
Okay.
The attorneys can appear in the lower courts. They can now apparently also appear in the higher courts, but the advocates only appear in the higher courts. And then obviously there are us, the judiciary. So the judiciary are the judges and the magistrates who form so the government is made up of the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. And so the judiciary, I'm part of the judiciary, and that you are appointed by a committee of other magistrates and politicians, or the judges are also appointed by the Judicial Service Commission, and magistrates are appointed by the Magistrate Service Commission, I think it's called. So yeah, so there are options of how to practice law, and then there are various other for example, in the maintenance court, there's a maintenance officer who has to have a law degree, and he works for the Department of Justice, or he or she works for the Department of Justice. So there are different places where you can practice law, but yeah, so it is quite a long process. So if you want to be an advocate, you don't do the 2 years of articles, you do what is called clerkship, I think, and you kind of attach yourself to an advocate who then mentors you for a year, and then you also write an exam, and then you admit it to what is called the bar.
Okay.
As an advocate.
Okay. So ours in the US is just all kind of combined together.
Yes, I think it looks that way when we watch TV.
Yeah, it is. You go to undergraduate degree, and then
Yes.
you go to law school, and then you take the bar exam. But then once you're a lawyer, you could go in whatever different direction you want.
Or like a general practitioner, yeah.
Yeah. So this is Integrative Lawyers of the World. Can you tell me, what does integrative law or being an integrative lawyer mean to you?
I think to me, what drew me to the integrative lawyers movement was this emphasis on authenticity and the freedom to practice law in a way that is true to personal values and ethics and beliefs, and then also the willingness to embrace lawyers of all kinds and all types of practices. Whereas I think, you know, the old school lawyer is somebody that's very, you know, in a suit and tie and practices in a very rigid way. Yeah. And I've never been like that in my personal life. I am a little bit of a maverick. I normally find myself on the lunatic fringe of something. I've always done things, you know, I was willing to homeschool when homeschooling was illegal, and you know, I was willing to do things that I had strong convictions about, even though they were not accepted by, you know, the general public. So I love this idea of connecting with other legal practitioners who were looking for a more human and authentic and restorative, healing way to practice law. Because as I've given law thought, I've thought to myself that law is all about the governing of relationships. Mm. So if you think about law, there is not a single law that exists that doesn't, at the end of the day, deal with relationships. Even environmental law deals with the relationship between man and the environment. Yeah. You know, commercial law deals with relationships between people in business. Family law deals with relationships between family members. Every area of the law deals with human relationships of some kind. And so for me, if we are in a profession whose main business is the business of human relationships, then surely we ought to want to be people who heal relationships. Mm-hmm. Because that speaks to social cohesion. And we all talk about wanting peace on earth, but we're not going to get peace on earth if we're not restoring and rebuilding and repairing broken relationships in our society, in our community, in the business world, in the environmental world, in the family sphere, in schools, wherever it is. So it feels like somebody hijacked the legal profession and it became a profession of adversarial, winner, loser, rewarder, punisher, and completely lost the thread of understanding that as legal practitioners, we should be in the business of healing relationships.
It's a very noble purpose in that aspect. How did you become familiar with integrative law?
So when I started exploring what was available in terms of practicing law, the first thing I found out about was the new practice of mediation in family law. And that drew me into, I went for a training in family law mediation. And when I was given the position as prosecutor in 2010, the chief prosecutor said he wants me to work in the maintenance and the family court. And I didn't really want to do that because I didn't enjoy family law, but he insisted that I do it. And I landed up using my mediation skills in the maintenance court to try and resolve the conflict between the father and the mother who were in conflict around the maintenance. And I was unaware that at the time that I entered the government service, there was a move in the Department of Justice to try and use mediation to resolve even the criminal cases. And what had happened was the National Prosecuting Authority have strategic objectives that they have to meet and they have to present them to Parliament. And when they presented these statistics to Parliament, their statistics for cases resolved through informal mediation were abysmally low. So my boss came to me and he said, "Oh, are you the one who knows about mediation?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, well, you know, we've had this parliamentary portfolio committee questioning us as to why our stats are so low, and do you think you could do some research in this area?" So I said, "Okay." And and then I went around to different courts and I found out what was going on, and I fed back to him and I said, "Well, possibly the main problem is that the prosecutors have not been trained in this skill. So they don't know how to do it." So I said, "Okay, would you be able to do the training?" So it was one of those moments where I said, "Yes, of course I can," knowing that actually I couldn't. I just said, "Yeah, sure, okay, I'll do it." And then I came home and I thought, "Oh, help, now what?" And I started looking for mediation in criminal cases, and I couldn't find anything on the internet. And I stumbled on this word, restorative justice. And you would think I would have heard of it before, but I hadn't. Mm-hmm. So restorative justice then opened a doorway for me, and I started realizing this is not mediation. In a criminal court, it has to be restorative justice. Now I need to get some training on restorative justice so that I can in turn train the prosecutors. But nobody in South Africa was willing to train me. They all said prosecutors must not do restorative justice.
So what would be the difference between pure mediation and restorative justice?
In the criminal sphere, restorative justice requires that the offender acknowledges responsibility for the harm, and that the victim drives the process and is given the freedom to identify what they need to repair the harm that the offender has caused. Mediation in a family law matter is more, there isn't a clear victim and offender. There's a mother and a father who are fighting over contact and care. So it's a slightly different, it is still restorative justice, but it's not quite the same.
I guess
so in every area of...
I just said, when you were working on that project and you came back and said that they were not trained properly in mediation, but in addition, we need to do more restorative justice here, not just mediation. So what is it that you would then begin to do differently?
So because they had called the process informal mediation, they actually have it on their stats form. They've got two restorative justice options on their stats form. The one is informal mediation and the other one is diversion. So diversion is where the offender is given an option to do some kind of therapeutic program, and at the successful completion of that program, with feedback from the program directors that this person has adequately participated and learned the necessary skills, the charges are withdrawn and the criminal case is closed. And they leave the criminal justice system without having a criminal record. So those are the two options available in South African law of a restorative nature. So when I discovered restorative justice, and I discovered that there was this opposition to South African prosecutors studying it, I found the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And long story short, I landed up doing a master's degree in restorative practices online with this institute, which is situated in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And it was during that time that I was studying restorative practices that I started to have a deeper understanding of what a restorative practice is.
Did the prosecutors ever get over their reluctance to have the additional training? And then two, what was your deeper understanding of restorative justice?
So number one, it wasn't the prosecutors who were opposed to the training. It was the people outside of the government systems, the people in the non-government organizations who were doing the business of restorative justice, who felt that it was inappropriate for prosecutors to do restorative justice because they felt there was a conflict of interest. So their question was, how could a prosecutor take off their prosecutor hat and put on a restorative justice facilitator hat? So it wasn't the prosecutors themselves. And actually, in the end, we landed up, myself and a team of 5 other people, we landed up, we designed a restorative justice training program, a 5-day program, and we landed up training almost probably 300 or 400 prosecutors all over South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so that was, it was a very exciting time because we were really breaking ground and pioneering, and I had a wonderful team. I had a lawyer, I had a psychologist, I had a law lecturer, I had a private practitioner, mediator, and we sort of crafted a restorative justice training program specifically designed for prosecutors in the criminal justice system. And then what was the second question?
Your deeper understanding of restorative law. And first, to go from when you got asked to do this project initially, yes, I can do this, to like, oh, I just said yes, how am I going to do this? Then to developing the training and actually becoming like going where you needed to go to learn more, getting the master's and developing a training and then training hundreds of people. That's amazing.
Yes, I think that's a bit what life is like. You have to have the courage to say, I'll do it. And then you have to scramble for the skills and the knowledge and the networking and the people. You know, I always look around me and say, who can I ask for help? And, you know, and then somehow the people come across my path and then we just sort of put something together. So I'm more like a facilitator than, you know, in fact, I did hardly any of the training myself. What I had to do with the team that I gathered was I had to explain to them the unique setting that they were training into, because they didn't really understand the uniqueness of the setting that they were training into, and say, no, you can't. That's not going to work with a prosecutor. You have to understand this is how the process works, and then they would tailor their training to fit that unique process of a court's, you know, of a criminal prosecution. And then as far as a deeper understanding of restorative, so when I first heard about restorative justice, I had this one picture in my head, which was the TRC, which was run in South Africa. Bishop Desmond Tutu was instrumental, and it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But that's restorative justice on a grand national scale. addressing historical trauma and historical oppression. We had to bring restorative justice right down to the neighborhood, right down to the neighbors who were in conflict because, someone had bashed someone's car or something.
Yeah.
And the restorative, the International Institute for Restorative Training has a lovely definition about that when people are in authority, other people are more likely to make meaningful change in their life when the people in authority over them work with them rather than to them or for them.
Okay.
So this idea of working with and not doing something to someone or doing something for someone, but doing something with someone is very profound. It sounds very simple, but it's a very significant change. So the two model, so they use what they call the social discipline window to explain this. And the social discipline window has got 4 panes and like 2 sort of arms. The one arm indicates the accountability and the other arm indicates the support. So if you are in authority and functioning in the 2 window, then you are functioning with high accountability but low support. So it's like an authoritarian model. You will do it because I said you must. And then the 4 model will function as an authority figure who, you can think of the mother who always picks up her children's clothes. There's high support but low accountability. So the person never learns to do it themselves because someone's doing it for them. And then the low support and low control or accountability speaks to no control and no support, like neglectful. Like, I use a parent because it's the easiest way to describe it. I don't care if your room is a mess. I'm just going to ignore it and carry on with my life. And I don't care if you don't do your homework, that's fine. And then the restorative model offers high support, but also high accountability. Okay. So you want to empower the people to do what they must do. You require them, you hold them to a high standard of action, but you support them on that journey. And so I understood that even in my court, I need to, when I'm speaking to parents, and that's where the mediation project that we run is so empowering, because what we say to parents is, you have 2 options here. We can offer you this mediation, which we won't cost you.
Tell us a little bit more about how you bring the restorative practice and incorporate the principles of integrative law into your role as a magistrate.
Okay, so there's 3 main areas of law that I preside over. The one is child protection, where children are removed because of abuse or neglect. The second one is parents who are in conflict over care and contact. And the third one is the maintenance court, which is the court that determines how much maintenance should be paid every month, or child care or child support. And also governs conflict around non-payments and also the determination of how much the payment should be. So let's start with child protection. Child protection, we work very closely with social workers. They get news of some situation where children are either being abused or neglected, and after investigation or perhaps on an urgent basis, bring the children to court. And our job as children's court magistrates is to either ratify the removal and placement into safe care, or to inquire or instruct further investigation is done, or return a child to a parent, that kind of thing. So the Children's Act makes provision for the fact that the children's court must be child friendly, and that's why I've got my 2 teddies sitting next to me here, because my children's court is full of toys. There's a ball pool, there's a drawing table, there's a farm set, and in fact, I leave the door open. So my court is my office. I very rarely go into the formal court setting. I conduct the court processes in my office, and occasionally I will go into a formal court setting, put on a gown and a bib and sit up high and have people sworn in and all that type of stuff. But generally the children come rushing into my room and they dive into the ball pool and they play with the toys, and I've tried to make it really comfortable and happy for them. Yeah. And I started a practice of giving teddies away and toys and coloring in books and journals and all kinds of things, and it's grown and grown, and people just contact me from all over Cape Town. I don't know how they hear about me, but they constantly drop off donations. So I've got an flowing out teddy sort of thing going on in my court. So children, when we finish the processes, I say to them, right now, the last thing we have to do is you have to take a toy before you leave, and you have to choose the toy you want to take. And of course, that causes them a lot of joy and excitement. So as a children's court magistrate, how do I see my role in an integrative, restorative way? I tell the children, my job is to, number one, make sure that you're safe. And then number two, make sure that you're happy. And then number three, make sure that you're going to school, in that order. So I've used some of the skills I learned in the restorative course I did, like life space crisis intervention and narrative conversation, to elicit information from children. So if I get the sense that a child wants to say something and hasn't got the freedom to do it, I will ask the grown-ups to exit the room, keep the social worker with me, and then do what I need to get the child to open up and tell me what's going on. And very often children will, I ask them the kind of questions that I hope are open-ended, like, if there was somewhere else you could live, where would that be? And very often the children will identify a caregiver that they would rather be with than the one that they currently are with. And the social workers are quite surprised by that, because they've never heard that, because they never asked the child. So then I will order the social worker to go and investigate that as an option and see if it's possible. And very often I'm able to place children with the auntie or the neighbor or the granny or the whoever that they've identified as the person they want to live with.
So even with the children, I'm looking for, before how you were saying it was really a meaningful change from working or at or to someone, but working with. And by asking the children that question, you are working with them. You're bringing them part of it and giving the accountability and support at the same time.
And you know, the Children's Act allows that. The Children's Act is, as I said, it's a very progressive piece of legislation. It allows a child to approach the courts on their own. And we've had that once or twice. So we had a 15 or 16-year-old come into the building and say, I need help from the Children's Court, all on their own. And then we open up Children's Court proceedings at the behest of the child. And the Children's Act also requires that the child's views are considered appropriate to their age and stage. So, we also have the option of appointing a legal aid lawyer for the children. But like I said, I try and engage the children on my own to try and hear what they have to say. And the children, I think they've come to know me as the magistrate who wants them to be happy.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that said about me.
To have.
Yeah, she's that magistrate that wants us to be happy. And then when it comes to the parents who are in conflict over care and contact, I try to assist them to see the problem. So one of the things I'll say to them when they come is that I'm not a punishing, rewarding court, and I'm not a winning and losing court. I am a problem-solving court. But this is a children's court, so we have to identify what the problem is from the child's perspective. And when I say that, there's definitely a shift in how they're seeing it, because when they arrive, they're all about their rights and how their rights have been violated and how that parent is so mean and nasty to them. And I try and say, look, let's try and see this problem from this child's perspective. This child's problem is that she's not seeing her daddy often enough. The relationship with her daddy is suffering because your relationship with each other is over. Or this child is suffering because you are in deep conflict with each other. So how can we help you resolve the conflict so that the child can benefit? So the mediators, this is a long story, but there's a team of mediators that works every Saturday at Children's Court in Wynberg. So there's approximately probably 6 mediations every Saturday morning that are taking place. And so I would refer that couple to that 2-hour slot of mediation on a Saturday morning at court. And the mediators are working as volunteers. They don't charge anything, and they're all accredited family law mediators. Some of them are social workers, some of them are lawyers, some of them are business people. And we've called that, we've formed it as a non-profit, and it's called For the Children's Sake. So even the name For the Children's Sake describes what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then with the maintenance situation is similar, very similar. Parents are in conflict about how much money should be paid. And again, I try to explain to them, it's not a winning-losing court, it's not a punishing-rewarding court, it's a problem-solving court. Here we need to establish how much money is available and what we think is fair to give to the child for the maintenance based on what both parents' financial picture is. So constantly trying to de-escalate the hostility, the litigiousness, the conflict. And I even have to lecture lawyers about it. I even have to say to lawyers, you know, can you take your boxing gloves off, please? Because this is a problem-solving court. This is not a fighting court. And the Children's Act says that. The Children's Act says that in every matter that comes to the Children's Act, a Children's Forum, an approach that is conciliatory should be adopted, and an adversarial approach should be avoided. So the statute, the legislation, gives me the license to be that restorative.
That's good that it does that, and it gives you that authority.
Yes.
That was my question a question I was going to ask is, how are the lawyers in this? Because so many are ingrained in the adversarial fight, and I have to make the other side look bad, or, you know, blaming and pointing. So when you set that tone, does it sometimes take a little reminding or modeling a little bit for the attorneys what that looks like, and for their clients?
It definitely does, because, you know, when firstly, what I call it a therapeutic jurisprudence model, because the way I would describe therapeutic jurisprudence is that it's a marriage of coercion and collaboration. So the coercion starts in that somebody has approached the court and launched an application, whether it's an application for contact or an application for a maintenance order. And as a result of that, the other person is subpoenaed to court, so they don't have a choice. They have to come. It's not an option. If they don't come, they can be arrested. So there's the coercion. But the minute they're both at court, we switch to the collaborative model. And we say, okay, now we're here. Now, and it really works very well, because if there wasn't that coercive element, there wouldn't be the opportunity to invite them to collaborate.
Okay.
Because they would just say, because we've got a model called the Family Advocates Office, but they can only invite parents to the family advocates. And very often, a parent will just refuse to go, and nothing can be done about that. Whereas in our case, we can, and I mean, I don't think I've authorized a warrant for the arrest of any parent ever, but I use it as a leverage. I'll phone and say, you have to come, and if you don't come, I won't have a choice. I have to authorize a warrant for your arrest.
Wow.
And so obviously when they come, they're feeling a bit intimidated and angry. But then I immediately try and diffuse that and say, look, this is about the child and what the child needs and what the child's rights are. So I often say to the parents, you know, we want to resolve this issue, because I say to them, when this court case is over, and especially with lawyers in the room, and you've paid your legal fees and the court case is finished, this family will continue forever. This family is never going to go away. You will always be the father, you will always be the mother. And keep in mind that almost 80% of the cases I deal with are not married parents. you know, a lot of the parents I deal with are unmarried. You will always be the father, you will always be the mother. This child will always be your child. There's going to be a wedding one day. There's going to be grandchildren one day. This family is not going anywhere. So it's in your long-term interest that we try and help you to find a way to get on with the maternal family or to get on with the paternal family. What happens in children's courts, and sometimes even in maintenance courts, we do involve the wider family. And sometimes when
You think the wider family, like grandparents and like extended family?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I learned that also with the IRP about the family group conference model, which is adopted in New Zealand and in Holland. And a family group conference is where the professionals, the social workers and the lawyers facilitate a family group conference to give the family the opportunity to come up with a solution to whatever the problem is, and to then rally around and offer support so that the professionals don't have to get involved again. So it's a very sustainable way to solve some kind of family conflict, because if the family constantly needs the professionals to step in, then that's not really sustainable. But if the family can learn to draw upon one another, or not even family, neighbors or other community people of support, teachers or you know, friends, family friends, to say, let's get together to talk about this issue and let's come up with a plan that's going to resolve this issue. So sometimes where a mother and father are in deep conflict and they can't even be in the same room, but the father has to go and fetch the child, then we ask the grandmother if the mother can drop the child at the grandmother's house and the father can fetch the child from the grandmother, and sort of put a bit of distance between mom and dad, using a neutral third party who's also a family member, which is good for the child, to minimize the fact that the child might be exposed to conflict at the sort of handover point.
Yeah.
So, you know, just being creative and just thinking and using common sense and thinking from a child's perspective what's going to work in this situation, and how to empower this family to take this relationship forward and recover from the break, and then learn how to just get on with each other for the sake of the child into the future.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we focus on. We focus on trying to empower the family and the couple to manage with the fact that they're no longer a couple, but that they're still family. Even if they weren't married, they're still family because they're the parents.
I think it's important to have the extended or the wider family involved when you can, because sometimes they can be a source of support, but sometimes they can also be a driver of the dispute. So that when they're in that group conference and they're hearing the same "let's all work together" thing, that does bring all the interested people on board on the same team for the child. That makes sense.
And also the opportunity to air and ventilate the cause of the pain and the anger and the frustration, and with a mediator present, where that mediator can facilitate some kind of a restorative process, almost like in the criminal justice system, where somebody has to say, look, I was offended when you did X, for there to be an opportunity for healing and forgiveness and, you know, moving on. So it's a safe space to address the historical hurts and have them aired and put on the table and looked at and said, okay, this did happen and let's move on from this. And where necessary, someone might have to apologize or whatever is required, because it's no good just sweeping it all under the carpet if it's going to constantly cause, you know, conflicts between the parents. And we deal with a lot of very young parents, with teenage parents who are still living with their own parents. So we can't exclude the grandparents because they're basically caring for the baby, and understandably are extremely angry with the other person because this child has now, their school career has been scuppered or whatever. So yeah, we do a lot of family group conferencing on a Saturday morning.
And what a nice context to do it in. Again, I'm going back to where you say you set the foundation. We're not one of placing blame or punishment, but one of problem solving. That when someone's feeling like they're being blamed, or I could just see that can help lower the defensiveness. If people can really know and trust in that process, the defensiveness is going to go down, and then the healing can open, or the space for healing can open.
I definitely see a shift when I say to people, I'm not here to reward or to punish. I'm not here to decide who's a good or a bad person. I'm here to identify the problem from the child's perspective, and then together with you, let's decide how we can solve this child's problem. So try and shift the problem onto the child and say, this child has a problem. How can we, the adults, solve the child's problem?
Yeah. And together with you, again, bringing in that component of wit. You had sent me some pictures. Let me see if I can share my screen. I thought I had them up. I do. Is it okay for me to use them like this?
Yes. So what happens is in my attempt to engage with children, and I gave you an example of discussing where they want to live. But the other type of children we deal with are, and one of the definitions in the Children's Act is, how do we decide if a child is in need of care and protection? So that's the terminology we use, and that's another conversation, that both the statutes, the Child Justice Statute and the Children's Act, have changed terminology. So, for example, the Child Justice Act, we don't talk about juvenile criminals or delinquents, we talk about children in conflict with the law. And in South Africa, a child is defined as anyone under the age of 18. Okay. So we don't define teenagers and children, we just call anyone under 18 a child. In the Children's Court, one of the definitions of a child in need of care and protection is a child where a caregiver or parent cannot control their behavior. So this is one of those little children. Their parents come to us and say, I'm terrified that my child's going to die because they've got involved with gangsters and they're taking drugs and I can't control them, and they stay out at night and they don't go to school. And the social workers bring them to us, and we've got different programs that we send them on that are actually quite useful, rehabilitation programs and behavior modification programs. But one of the things I do with teenagers is I always say to them, let's say her name is Sally. Hi, Sally, how are you, darling? Have a seat. And they're always a bit defensive because they've been dragged to court by someone and they think I'm going to take out a big stick and smack them. And then I'll say, so tell me, what grade are you in? And then I'll say, so tell me, what do you want to do one day when you finish school? And if they say they want to be a lawyer, then I'll whip out my gown and my bib and I say, okay, let's see what you're going to look like one day when you're a lawyer. And I'll put my gown and my bib on them and take a picture of them and give it to them. And the whole atmosphere shifts in the room.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I do. So I've got quite a few pictures of children wearing my gown.
Well, it's nice in so many ways. One, in when they say it, someone that says, this is possible, you can do this. You know, I believe it's a possibility for you. And then once someone sees that or they imagine it, now you're putting it on, it opens up. It opens up possibility to their dreams.
Yes. Yeah, and I believe that because I believe that, you know, if you don't have some vision or some dream, then, you know, you're not going to make the changes. And then after that, I'll discuss with them. So tell me, what drugs are you using? And then they'll just tell me. And then I'll say, okay, so where do you get the drugs from? When did you start? And, you know, then I'll say, you know, if you want to practice law, it's a little bit of a problem because it's still illegal in South Africa. And if they catch you with it, you'll get a criminal record and then you won't be able to study law. So maybe you should think about that, you know.
Yeah. And start thinking about it. And then Just the tying it together for them like that, we're seeing the consequences of your actions does have an effect maybe on their choices in the future that they had not seen before.
I hope so, you know.
One last question. So
okay.
When we started this, you were talking about when you first entered into the practice of law and how after 5 years you were happy to leave the practice and go into the season of your life of being a full-time mother and wife, and for that itself, but that the practice of law was, I think you said you hated it. I think you did say
I did.
Yeah, you hated it. I'm trying to come up with a nice word, but I'm like, no, you said you hated it. How would you describe your feeling about practicing now?
Now I love it. Now I love my daily work. It's exceptionally tough. So I come home from work every day feeling completely spent, emotionally and physically. My challenge now is to be true to my values. And one of the things I've learned while studying the restorative practices was a concept of experiencing yourself as a living contradiction. So all these noble and wonderful things I've told you about, I don't always get them right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I lose my temper, sometimes I can be sarcastic, sometimes I can be unpleasant. And that's my challenge now, is to learn the skills to grow in my own self-awareness, what triggers me. And, you know, I'm a Christian, and so a lot of my work is guided by prayer, and my daily prayer is for compassion and wisdom. And because sometimes I do lack compassion, and I definitely need a whole lot of wisdom. And when I lack compassion, I feel disappointed in myself, and I feel like, okay, that I didn't do that so well. I need to do better next time. So I'd hate somebody who had to watch this to think, well, she wasn't like that with me. She was really quite awful. And they would be right. They would be true, because there are times when I'm under a lot of pressure and I just, you know, lose the plot. So I don't want to make out as though I'm an angel with a halo.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because I 100% connect with that. And then what was it that you said, the experiencing the contradictions of yourself?
Yeah, experiencing yourself as a living contradiction. So in other words, you know how you ought to be, but sometimes you fail. And you know what your values are. I value the restorative approach. I value being with and being compassionate. But every now and again, I'm triggered and I can be very sarcastic, and it just slips out of my mouth. And yes, I can see from the expression in everyone in the room, like, ooh, that was harsh. Oh, the atmosphere's changed. Oh dear. But you know, we're human and we have to be conscious of our weaknesses. I mean, my professor at RRP said that authority without insight, personal insight, leads to malpractice. And I think that's very powerful for judges and anyone in authority, that if you are in authority and you have power over people, which magistrates do, but you don't have insight, personal insight, you're not dealing with your own inner self, and you're not aware of your own weaknesses and strengths and triggers, it leads to malpractice, because then you yield your authority without compassion, without mercy, without grace, without redemption, you know.
That just opens up a whole nother conversation, which I know we're going to go, but the importance of inner work for people in positions of power or positions of authority in any level, in any sector.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely essential.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the mediation project?
So the mediation project started in about 2012 when a magistrate approached me to help with mediations in the children's court. At the time, I was still a prosecutor, but because she knew I had the accreditation as a family law mediator, she said, would I come on Saturday mornings and assist another magistrate who also has this accreditation and do mediations for the children's court between parents who are in conflict around care and contact. And the desired outcome is what is called a parenting plan, which is like a contract the parents enter into with each other. And so I did that every Saturday morning for a year. And when I mentioned this at the meeting that I attended of other family law mediators, people came to me and said they would also like to get involved. So long story short, by 2019, we had about 30 people working at courts every Saturday morning doing mediations. And I had been following the Hague Institute of Innovative Law on Facebook, whose byline is Access to Justice, and had noticed that they were coming to Cape Town to do a presentation. And I went to the presentation, and at the presentation, they told us that they've got an innovating justice challenge, and if we've got an innovating solution to a pressing legal problem, we should enter our project. And so I entered the project of the mediation at courts. And when I went onto their website, they said they need to know who the CEO is. And I thought, well, and then they said founder. So I thought, okay, I'll put my name down. And then they said, well, what's the name of your innovation? And I thought, well, what is the name of it? And then I said, it's for the children's sake. So, and then they said, well, what is the pressing problem that you are solving? And I said, well, the pressing problem is the conflict between parents who can't afford lawyers and they can't afford mediators, but they need to resolve the problems that they're experiencing of the conflict that they have with care and contact issues and also with child support issues. And so, long story short, I landed up going to Johannesburg, entering into the competition. We got through to the first round, and then we got through to the second round, and then we got through to the final round, and there were 9 of us who had to do a 4-minute presentation in Johannesburg to win funding for our project. And one of the things they couldn't understand about my project was that we didn't have a budget. It didn't cost us anything at all. And this was something that they really they struggled to get their head around, how we were doing this incredible work with absolutely no budget. But that was, and then that's when I learned the terminology lean. They said, oh, your model is very lean. And basically, because what we were doing is that we were using existing infrastructure, for example, the courtroom building for mediation rooms. We were using the fact that parties were already before court for conflict, they were already in litigation. The clerk of the court, who gets paid by the Department of Justice, would set up the mediation. The magistrate would refer the parties to the mediation, and the mediators themselves were doing the work on a voluntary basis. So the entire project was running with absolutely no budget at all. And since then, we've used some of the funding to, set up a website and try and roll this model out into other courts. And obviously then COVID struck and things got a little bit more difficult to do. But we are continuing with this model which basically boils down to a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. So I kind of believe in a model that if the private sector are willing to donate a percentage of their time, say on an annual basis, into a specific public sector, for example, the Department of Justice, the courts, maybe even hospitals, that it becomes like a top-up service. So where the magistrates are entitled to refer cases for mediation, but they aren't mediators. The Department of Justice has not provided mediators. Social workers can do it, but they are overloaded. The family advocate can do it, but they are overloaded. So we had to come up with a model that could enact what the legislation says we're allowed to do, but with no funding. And the answer was to draw on the private sector and say, would you be willing to volunteer one Saturday morning every 2 months or once a month for 4 hours to do the mediations? And the feedback we get from the mediators is that they find the work incredibly fulfilling because they are doing community service in an area of skill that they have. It's not like a soup kitchen or a blanket drive. It's something very specific, a professional skill that they have, and they are interfacing and interacting with people who they never ever work with Monday to Friday, because they're people who cannot afford the services of private lawyers or private mediators or private practitioners. And they find that very fulfilling, because they get to work with people that they wouldn't see normally at all in their daily lives.
So it gives them a sense of meaningful volunteering. Not that, I guess all volunteering is meaningful, but
Yes.
it's meaningful for their
Yes.
purpose and their skill set. Well,
Yes.
And is that part of for children's sake? Then that's how
for the children's sake. For the
children's
children's sake. Yes.
Good.
And some of the feedback I've got is that, one lawyer said to me, Gabby, sometimes I start to think, oh, I can't do this anymore. And then you send a little note and you end it with for the children's sake. And I think, for the children's sake, I must do this. So it's a little bit manipulative. But yeah, I think just the feedback has been so positive. And also the couples who come, they come to me on the Monday morning, and I always say to them, how did you experience the mediation? What did it feel like for you? And they would often say, it was so good. I felt that I was heard, and I felt that the mediator was kind and was able to help us come to agreement. And I often say, do you think you could have done it without the mediator? And they say, oh, definitely not. Mm-hmm. So, it's a very full, it's one of my favorite current sort of projects, is that mediation project.
And you're having the mediations on Saturday, which helps.
Yes, because those people work Monday to Friday. There are some people who prefer, we fit in with our mediators. So if they say, could I rather do it on a Wednesday? We say, not a problem. So the beauty of it is that we don't have to pay for a venue, because it's in the court building. They come to the court building, and they've given us a room that is not being used. So we sort of grab that and put a sign on the door, mediation room. And but for example, on a Saturday morning, they use my office and the other magistrates' offices and a boardroom and a courtroom, and because there's about 6, so there's 3 children's courts and the domestic violence court, so there's 4 courts, and most of the courts book 2 mediations a Saturday. So if it's fully booked, it's 8 mediations that Saturday. So tomorrow, for example, there'll be 8 mediations taking place. That means there's 8 court cases that hopefully, if they are resolved, those inquiries will be closed and those cases will come off the court roll. And the rate of resolution is almost 85%.
Wow, that's
very rare that the situations are not resolved.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being part of Integrative Lawyers all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. It was very nice meeting you and very nice talking with you today. Thank you very much.
And likewise, Kerry, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And have a lovely day.
Thank you. You too.